This situation keeps getting crazier as we have yet another shocking report, this time surrounding one player that not only has fans fired up, but has major implications going forward on Brad Treliving's plans as they continue to not only make moves, but peruse the market surrounding a top 6 forward. We're going to break down this brand new report as it pertains to one particular defenseman that the Leafs have. We're also going to dive into a few other updates, folks. But before we get into it all, if you're a part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, you guys have been absolute beasts with the support. This is the place to be for daily Leafs content, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. About 71% of you are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel. Again, you guys have been beasts. Thank you guys for continuing support over here. Darius, lots to go over today, and a brand new report has dropped from Nick Kypreos, and it is a surprising one, and one that makes some sense in some regards, but on the other side has some fans very, confused, and it all stems from, of course, the trade for Dakota Joshua, which really opened up just a can of worms, essentially, for what this team needs to do going forward. Because, yes, it solves some problems in the bottom six, and it's a fantastic trade, but they have an abundance of bottom six wingers now. David Kampf, Nick Robertson, Calle Jarnkrok. They don't have someone in the top six yet, and they have $2.9 million of cap remaining. And Nick Kypreos has come out and revealed that if the Leafs move a defenseman, it'll likely be one of them, referring to Carlo or Morgan Rielly. And he said that Brandon Carlo specifically could be a part of a deal that adds some scoring to the forward group. So again, this kind of came out of nowhere. We've heard Carlo in the past, then it settled down. We'll dive into a trade that, supposedly was going to happen and then ultimately fell through. This is interesting because I am still of the mindset that it makes some sense for the Leafs if they have some sort of backup plan at the defensive position to maybe trade a defenseman for a top six forward. However, I want to make sure that this team still remains a very good defensive team, because this is the first time in a very long time they actually have a good defensive group. But Brandon Carlo's name got thrown out there by Kypreos. Take it with a little bit of a grain of salt here, but interesting nonetheless.
Like you brought up, when you look back at last season, for the first time in forever, it seems the Leafs goaltending and defense was solidified, right? There was no issues with it, and it was actually very good. I don't think it was the problem whatsoever. I think it was, mostly the forwards and the fact that they couldn't score in big moments and get it done. Now, there was a report earlier this summer that, Elliot Friedman was saying that they could move a defenseman to get a top six forward. That was kind of floated out there. This was early on. I don't even know if the Stanley Cup was awarded yet when that was floated out there, that they could be moving a defenseman for a top six forward or a forward and forward help. Now, I do believe in terms of Brandon Carlo, that they were shopping him earlier this offseason. I do believe that. And I think it was for one JJ Peterka from Buffalo, because I believe Buffalo was looking for, and look exactly what they got for JJ Peterka from Utah. I think they were looking for a right shot defenseman. So I do believe that it was Brandon Carlo. Obviously, it was a bigger trade, not one for one, but for JJ Peterka. And I think that actually would have been a great trade for the Toronto Maple Leafs, because that's a guy who can play in your top six. You can see here last season with the Buffalo Sabres, who were actually very good and underrated offensively, at least last season, but 77 games played, 68 points in those 77 games played, almost a point per game player. And I think he's going to take another step. And a lot of people didn't realize, how young he was. He only turned 23 last season. So at the time, I think that made a lot of sense for Brandon Carlo. You can upgrade in the top six. You get your top six guy, and for the foreseeable future, he's a young player who's only getting better for Brandon Carlo, and then you figure it out. You go out and get another defenseman if you really need to, right? You can do that. So, and for some reason right now, it seems like that might be easier around the league than finding a top six guy for whatever reason, but that would have been nice at the time. But that has passed, and all of that to say, with the current circumstance of, if you look around the league, right, the only team that's selling is really the Pittsburgh Penguins. If you're calling Kyle Dubas, he's probably going to want a lot from you. It's probably future, something that you don't want to give up in that way. So I don't think it really makes sense. So I would keep Brandon Carlo on the team. If you were to make that trade for JJ Peterka, I would have done that. But everything else that's available at this point, don't just trade Brandon Carlo for the sake of trading him. The defense was good. I want to see what he looks like with a full season of Morgan Rielly. That being said, if you still want to trade a defenseman, like Elliot Friedman said, for forward help, I think at this point it has to be Morgan Rielly. I don't know how likely that is. I think it's that instead of Brandon Carlo, but I don't think they do that just yet, and they want to see how that pairing kind of fares and then make a decision as we go.
Yeah, they obviously made a trade. They got I guess with the San Jose Sharks, they got an injury defenseman there. You look at the trade, and I can see here, fans don't really want Brandon Carlo traded. Makes some sense. I'd also probably prefer Morgan Rielly to be traded. And you look at what they gave up, they would have to get at least this back or more, or the equivalent of this. And of course, not going to be trading for picks back, but they'd get a player that they'd be able to, and the player they would have been able to get with Fraser Minton and a presumable first and a fourth is a lot, you would assume. And obviously it cost a good basically 2 first-round picks. I think Minton had similar value to a first-round pick, maybe a little bit less at the time. They also made a trade for Scott Laughton, and now, after seeing how everything played out, I don't mind those trades. Would you wish maybe they got a little bit more? Yeah, probably. But you still now have a solid, like you mentioned, defensive core for the future. So in any trade for Brandon Carlo, you would need a surefire top 6 player, like a guy, and we've been talking about a Troy Terry of the Ducks, someone like that, if you're moving
Mhm.
off of a defenseman, just because how valuable they are. And it is not easy to get a guy like Brandon Carlo and to replace, we've seen it with the Leafs for years and years and years under Dubas, how difficult it was to actually have a very good defensive core. You would need someone like that back. And he didn't have a great stretch with the Leafs. It wasn't bad at all, in his brief time there last season. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does next year. You have some time under Craig Berube now. He's only 28 years old. And not only that, I think there's something to be said about, like you mentioned, the entire offseason with him alongside his partner in Morgan Rielly, but also they have a lot more of an identity in the top 6, which I actually think will translate to the defense and make their job a lot easier as well, considering the fact that they've been pretty soft the past, in the core 4 era. And now I think the blue line will be helped out by the physicality, especially of guys like Dakota Joshua, who average a ton of hits a game as well.
Yeah, and I think one thing, to go back to my point of keeping everybody and keeping the defense the same, I think one thing that was very interesting to me this season, if you look at past seasons with the Toronto Maple Leafs and guys they've acquired at the trade deadline, like a Brandon Carlo, let's say, and Scott Laughton this year, if you look at seasons past, guys have come in, it's taken them a few games to get up to speed, but then they kind of fit into the roles well, they play well, whatever it is, but the team still doesn't get the job done, right? This year, I thought it was weird how Brandon Carlo and Scott Laughton, they took a while to get going, a long time to get going. And I don't even think they were fully comfortable when the season ended, when they lost in Game 7 to the Florida Panthers. I thought that was interesting. Maybe there was a distraction in the room that we've been talking about the last little while, and some of the guys weren't on the same page. Heading into next season, I do think that, Scott Laughton, at the end of it, he did start looking a little bit more comfortable. Same with Brandon Carlo. And I do wonder what a full season in the lineup, a training camp, and again, starting the year in training camp and starting the year together on a pairing will do. I wonder what it will do for Brandon Carlo and Morgan Rielly. So I do wonder about that. They didn't look too comfortable. So I wonder if, you settle in, come into camp, everything might be okay. Because to me, the defense looks pretty good. I don't think you want to move off that. And like you said, 28 years old for Brandon Carlo, you're going to have to get something that does blow you away, because you traded away Fraser Minton, a guy who could have been playing in the NHL this year, right? He was traded away. That's done. We don't have to think about that, but could have been playing there. First round pick, all of these things. If you were to get like a JJ Peterka back in return, then yes, okay, that makes sense. But I don't think there's anything like that available anymore. So I think you keep them together. If there is a defenseman you want to trade the guy that has more term on his contract. He's making more money. That's Morgan Rielly. You trade him, and then you try and go out and get a number 1 defenseman, I guess, somehow this season or next season, free agency, what have you. But I think that's more of the plan. For Brandon Carlo, I would keep him, and I think that he will settle into his role.
Yeah, I think ultimately it'll be interesting to follow. I have full faith in Brad Treliving. If he trades Brandon Carlo, I'm sure they'll have a backup plan, whether that's using the defensive core they have, Philippe Meyer, all those new guys that they've gotten as well, or if it's just a matter of, like you mentioned, maybe signing a different defenseman, trading. But it's at a very interesting spot right now in the offseason where moves are definitely going to be coming, even more moves, because the Leafs haven't addressed the top 6. It's just a matter of who. A lot of rumblings about Max Domi. Also, the Easton Cowan thing. Will he factor into the bottom 6, or who be used as a trade chip to get a top 6 forward? I mean, there's a lot of different variables here, but let us know down below in the comment section what your thoughts are on all of this. Do you want to see them move on from Brandon Carlo? What are your thoughts on the report? Thank you guys for watching. See you later.